and running the flight levels, the introduction to flight levels check-in that the three of us have been offering. And so we thought we would invite him to come and join us and do some sessions with us today. Cool. So, Andreas, do you want to say hello to everybody and then, say hello?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm more than happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just wondering why I'm the person who is sitting somewhere in the middle of Germany instead of Menorca or somewhere in Sweden. But, well, we can solve that problem later.
Well, it's lovely that we can have you with us. And of course, glad to be able to have Klaus, although it is somewhat annoying that he gets to drink kava and sit in the sun while we sit in, it was minus 0.2 degrees or something here in Sweden last night. So winter is somehow actually here. Anyway, let's have a look here quickly. So a couple of things that I want to say. Tonight's session is a little bit different in that all three of us will be answering questions around the topics that we have planned. So I want to remind you or request that you ask your questions in the chat as we go. The topic for today is to explore how do you get started with flight levels. And as I said earlier, the idea here is that it's kind of framed around us having run these sessions where we do kind of a live check-in around folks who have attended the Introduction to Flight Levels course. And also through our trainings and working with lots of people, we get some common questions that come up. So what we've done is we've prepared a couple of questions that we'll kind of get or use to get the ball rolling. And of course, if you have more questions, please fire them off in the chat. Really, anything is game as far as flight levels and getting started is concerned. So fire off in the chat and we will talk some more about the questions as we go. Cool. So I guess kind of to kick us off a little bit with the first question, what I'd like to do is maybe, Andreas, you can tell us a little bit about one thing that I hear often in the setting, and maybe you've heard it as well, is this, well, what level should we start at, or which flight level should we build first? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, this is a question I always get asked when we do the trainings or when we do some consulting stuff. And it's an easy question, which is difficult to answer because where to start depends on several factors. One factor is what kind of problem are you about to solve? So if you design a flight level system, you have, I don't know, a challenge or a question you want to get answered, and you need to find out which system would help you providing the answer to the question. And this is the first indicator where to start. Is it a strategical question? Is it a matter of prioritization or limiting the work in your system, and or is it about how people work together? So this could be one kind of a choice where to start. Another thing you need to know or you need to think about is what level do you have access to? So when you want to build up a flight level system, you need to involve the people. So do we have access to the people? We want to develop systems with the people to involve them, and we want to avoid designing systems for other people. So whom can I gain access to? Whom can I involve? All this might help. I think a good answer to the question is always, if you really don't know, start with a flight level 2 system. The reason is every company has some kind of strategy. It might be good, but most companies know what to do. And most people know how to work. So on flight level 3, the strategy, on flight level 1, something might be there. But the link between the strategy and the operational level is often missing and lacking in organizations. And if you really don't know where to start, this is in many cases, from my experience, a good starting point, because this simply is non-existent in many organizations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I hear a lot of people kind of, when we talk about what's inside of flight level 2, they go, yeah, that's the thing we're missing. It's the sort of the missing link somehow. And so I think
it's also quite, I mean, it is a challenging thing. So it's two different things. Like when we talk about strategy, we're talking about 3 years, 5 years time horizon or something like this. And when we're talking about flight level 1, it's really like, okay, what am I doing in the next sprint or something like this? So this is really like two things that are on a totally different scale. And if these people communicate to each other, it's really hard. So one might say, yes, we need to conquer the, I don't know, Latin American market in 5 years. And the question that people that are doing the operational stuff have is like, okay, what does this mean for my next sprint? And I think that's exactly why flight levels is so powerful, because it somehow tries to exactly connect these two like horizons, and the flight level 2 plays a major role in this. Yeah, I would totally agree what Andreas said. Really cool.
Yeah. Cool. So another question that I get here is this one of like, well, we've been to some sort of I don't know, maybe we saw somebody talk about flight levels, we've read a book about flight levels, something along these lines. We've got this idea. And so the question, of course, comes up, well, how do we convince other people is usually how the question is asked. And just to sort of add a little bit of my own thought on this is that I like to kind of suggest to people that the idea of convincing others is perhaps the wrong way to frame the question. Rather than trying to sort of tell them, well, we have this great idea or this answer to a thing, is to try to sort of understand a little bit of the problems that they have. But I'm wondering, Andreas and Klaus, what do you think? Like when you're sort of specifically when dealing with other managers within an organization, what are some of the things that you think can be helpful in helping them to connect to these ideas around flight levels?
Andreas, go for it.
Yeah, I really like talking in pictures so people understand. So the question, especially from management, is how can we get started with flight levels? Whom do we involve? Or questions like, I don't know, it takes too long for us to finish products or to deliver whatever. Should we improve, I don't know, our development department? My answer to this always would be, imagine you want to, I don't know, get stronger and you want to go to the gym. Is it a good idea to only train your right bicep? I mean, you can do that and you can very easily and fastly see the result. You will have a big, huge right bicep. But does it make you stronger? Does it make you more powerful as an organism, as a person in the whole? The answer obviously is no. So you need to look at the whole system. You need to look which parts of the organization play together in order to answer questions, deliver results, and create outcome. So this is always easy to understand that it doesn't make much sense to look at one particular part of an organization if you want to improve the whole thing.
I think it's interesting because part of the question is sort of framed around like, who else do we involve in this process of kind of introducing flight levels? And I guess beyond just the managers, there are lots of other people. I guess part of the question, for me at least, I think comes from this place of, well, we need some kind of authority or kind of someone to make a decision to say, yes, we do this. And maybe we're not so good at doing that in a group, or, the managers kind of hold the authority and so on. But I think there's an interesting thing around how do you kind of maybe connect to the problems that they're seeing and that sort of a thing. And of course, the point often for me is that there are more people than just the managers that you need to work with in this case. So if we think about some of the other examples, perhaps, I mean, there's other people within your team, there's other teams within the organization. What maybe, Klaus, some of your thoughts on how do you get other people, maybe non-managers, involved in some of this? Where would you start with this?
I mean, getting involved. So what we do in flight levels is we build quite a lot of working systems. So, I mean, that's like the visual artifact that we see. It's a board or something like this. And I think the very first thing that we need to do is we don't build. I mean, Andreas, you already said it a little bit like this. We usually don't build these systems for people. We build it with people. And the build process doesn't start with like the workshop where we build the system. The very first thing is like, okay, what's the problem that we are trying to solve here? And if we find like an answer to this question, that's the problem we want to solve. And I don't solve it for you, but you solve it for yourself. And the tool that you're using is flight levels. I think that's a cool way of also bringing people on board, because it's not like a smart consultant stepping in and telling you, okay, that's the way how you need to work starting from tomorrow. It's more like getting all the people on board, getting all the people involved, and then we do it together. So it's not my thing. I mean, it's how to say my and their. So it becomes our thing. It's not just like the thing from the consultant. So
I I like
This
what
makes sense.
Rita's saying in the chat here. She's talking about, at different times you might need to involve different people. But I think the idea is that, when we're starting out with this, often what we notice is this thing is, as the organization grows, your communication starts to suffer. And you start to say, well, how do we design these conversations and interactions between the different folks in different areas and so on? And I think a lot of the time it is the same people that are actually involved in multiple levels, as she is saying here. And so it is a little bit of saying, well, how do we have the right conversations with the right people at the right time? So yeah, I like this way of framing it. Cool. Andreas, were you going to ask something?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
There wasn't a question. I just wanted. It sounded like you were going to say something. So.
Okay. I think it's a lot of what Klaus said. It's not about convincing the people. What we provide is a framework, and we want the people to work with it, to understand it, and to improve their field of work and organization. So I think the best way to convince people is showing that it works and showing success. So we're working very visually when we implement flight levels. We start with visualized situation. So do it visually, do it so that everybody in the organization sees, and even the people who are not convinced to implement flight levels at this point in time might see others working successfully with it, and they might get the idea by simply looking at what you're doing, and therefore you need to do it as prominent and as transparent and as openly as possible. So if you want to convince people, you can talk to them, but you can also simply show the success of others in the organization and invite them to work with it as well. Yeah. So
I often say to people that it's a good idea with any change, not just with flight levels, to be aware of. Usually one of the symptoms you're trying to address in the organization is that everyone is super busy. And so if you come along with a new idea and that idea, for whatever reason, doesn't quite resonate with people, or even if it does resonate with people, it's usually means some extra work on top of the other work. And so just to be cognizant of the fact that maybe you need to kind of give people some time to really see how it connects to their specific situations or opportunities. Maybe you can, as you said, Andreas, try it out in one area and then show some kind of results. These kind of things, I think, are great ways to do it. But really try to connect it to the challenges and opportunities that people see. I think anytime... what was the thing I heard the other day? I was chatting with Marcus, and he said... agility is like a fart. If you push it too hard, it turns into shit. And I think this is the thing, is that you don't want to do this. You don't want to push too hard, because people will resist and they will dislike what you're saying. And now it becomes just an antagonistic, unhealthy, unproductive conversation. We definitely don't want to be. Sorry, I hope that joke wasn't offside for too many people on the stream, but yeah.
So it proves again that people working in agile environments are always philosophers.
Something like this, perhaps. Yeah.
Highly philosophical.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe some experience. I don't know. No. Let's not go down this road.
So I'm going to jump ahead. There's a question here from Cameron, I think Lesk is how you pronounce this. Can you offer some rules of thumb or guidance on implementing flight level 3 when level 2 and 1 are already in place? Curious what your thoughts on this are.
So if I get the question right, we have a flight level 2 and we have a flight level 1, and now we want to implement a flight level 3 system as well. Work as transparently as possible. Tell the people who you expect to be working on the flight level 3 system that there's a good way to connect with what the people in your organization do. This is the way to influence the number of work or the things that are being worked on in the organization by the people who do the strategy work. So you can invite them to connect to the system and do it all in one row. So again, show what you're doing.
And I think it's a good problem to have, actually. So if there is already a flight level 2 and flight level 1 to add the flight level 3, I mean, of course, people, they need to want to have it actually in place. You cannot like Cliff already said before, you cannot push it too hard because then it turns into shit. But if there is like people who are interested in it, connecting it is actually quite easy. So the thing is, what you're doing on flight level 3, you're totally trying to shift from output to outcome, and try to somehow slice down the time horizons, like 5-year, 3-year, 1 year, quarter, something like this on an outcome basis. And then we can talk about actions, what we actually need to do. And these actions we feed to the flight level 2 system. And I think one thing is quite important here. When we talk about flight levels and we talk about flight level 3, flight level 2, flight level 1, it's not isolated systems. We always need to connect them. It doesn't make any sense to have isolated systems. So if we have a flight level 2 system, we can build the flight level 3 system, but the most important thing is that we connect it to the flight level 2 system. And the flight level 2 system has to be connected to the flight level 1 systems. And then I think, build it, do it.
Yeah, it's a lot like the picture you use in your book. It's the zooming in and zooming out. But, well, overall, you always see the same kind of work. It's just the level of detail that changes. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is, I mean, maybe we should highlight this again. So in the end, what you always do is you apply the 5 activities on each and every level. So even on flight level 3, what you're doing is nothing else than applying the 5 activities. Visualize your situation. Try how you can create focus, establish actual interactions, measure your progress, and improve. And that's what you're doing also on flight level 3. And connect to the flight level 2, and off you go.
Cool.
Which, by the way, is sorry for jumping in. Which, by the way, is very, very powerful narrative if you want to explain flight levels in organizations. Because no matter where you are in your organization, whether on the operative level or on the flight level 2 level, on the flight level 3 level, you always do exactly the same thing, and it always looks the same, and it always follows the same logic. So no matter at which level you look at your system, you understand what's being done and how it works and how it's being measured and how progress is being evaluated. So it's very, very powerful. You don't have to learn different things depending on the position you're working in your organization. And this is a very, very cool story to tell.
Yeah, it is. So it's so it's always these 5 activities. So even in Flight Levels Academy, we are thinking of like coming up with somehow additional workshop formats, because currently we talk about the flight level flow design, which is like where you design a flight level 2 system. But I think it makes sense, as you just said, Andreas. If you build the flight level 1 system, you basically do the same thing, but it's a different environment. If you build the flight level 3 system, you do the same things, but it's a different environment. It follows a different logic. On flight level 3, other things are important. On flight level 3, on flight level 2, it's a lot about visualizing the dependencies. It's about creating flow and so on. On flight level 3, other aspects are important. It's more like this outcome kind of thing. It's more like this breaking down the strategy to some actionable goals. So these are these are the things that are more important on flight level 3, but still you're doing the same things. That's what we try to do in Flight Levels Academy. In 2022, we hopefully will launch separate training for flight level 1, 2, and flight level 3, which just makes sense. And if you want to connect everything together, that's what we call flight level systems architecture. So you need to build an architecture, actually, how everything works together. Yeah.
Cool. Cameron, I see you already said thank you for the answer. I was going to ask if we had answered your question. If there are follow-ups, please fire off in the chat. Cool. So I'm going to move us on to the next question. There's actually 2 very similar questions. Christoph is asking, I'm wondering if flight levels and OKRs are a good fit. This is also a common question that comes up. How do you explain how they combine together? And then Julian is asking a very similar question. OKRs and flight levels seem similar. What is the difference? Who would like to give some thoughts on this?
Andreas, go for it.
Thank you. So first question was, are OKRs and flight levels a good fit? Yes, they are from my perspective. Because if you set up the flight level 3 system in a smart way, in a clever way, you can use your OKRs as flight items on the system. So you can operate them using your flight level 3 system. And if you already work with OKR, the step to flight levels or flight level 3 is not too far, and it's not too hard to understand. I'm not sure if I would say that OKR and flight levels are similar, because OKR is focusing on the flight items, so on the work itself, while flight level is focusing on how to process this, how to measure the progress, and how to communicate the things that are being worked on in the organization. So they are a good fit, but I don't see a contradiction. And I don't think it's exactly the same, because it's focused on different things. One is what we want to do, and the other is more how we want to do it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's quite common these days that people are doing something with OKRs, and I also, I mean, I work with flight levels a lot, so it's not surprising that I see a lot of flight levels, but I see the two of them quite commonly working quite well together. I think there's a couple of interesting things about OKRs, and one for me is that the importance is about trying to create a connection, as Andreas said, like the interactions and the connections between the different levels, not just about assigning individual goals and tasks. And I think the other thing that's interesting is that if I was to look at it as a similarity, is that in flight levels, I mean, it's not like we say you should never, ever have an individual kind of level 1 system or something like this for one person. But the point is that we're trying to visualize the flow of work or the flow of value to a customer. And often what I see as an anti-pattern that people do is they start with OKRs actually down at the bottom of the company, and they work on individual targets, or they go so far down into the detail. And the challenge for me is that the more you split things apart, the harder it is to kind of connect them back together again. And so if all three of us had our own OKRs, I don't know. I mean, unless they somehow magically are designed that involves collaboration, it's unlikely that we would naturally just kind of work together. So just be aware of that in sort of thinking about this. But yeah. Klaus, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I could. I mean,
if you'd like to.
I mean, it's always the same. I mean, like Andreas already said, it works very well together. So it's not like fire and water. It's like steak and potato. It goes very well together. And the thing with OKRs, I think that's something what we try to solve somehow in flight levels. So for me, if I take a look at some OKRs implementations, so when you define your OKRs, you're actually, I don't know how to say it, you're only working on the outcomes. It's like, okay, you're defining your outcomes, and then you break it down, and then you break it down again, and everyone is defining OKRs and OKRs and OKRs. And in flight levels, what we do often is like on a flight level 3 or on a flight level 2, we have a cut, and we are like, okay, now let's talk about actions. So in flight levels land, we talk about Okrs. So we add an A to the OKRs. This means we do objectives and key results, but we try to get to the point where we can come up with actions like epics, I don't know, initiatives or something like where really people are typing on the keyboard. And this is like the spring, the source of where the flow, the company flow actually starts. And I think this is something, I mean, I'm not an OKR expert, but that's something that I'm somehow missing in OKR. So where does the actual work and where does the company flow actually start? And that's a conscious decision in flight levels. You basically, when you build your flight level systems architecture, you say, okay, and that's where the flow starts. And I think that's so it's a little bit more than OKRs, what we usually do, and that's what we call Okrs. If this makes sense.
Okra. Okay.
Christoph, Julian, curious to hear if this is answering some of your questions. Maybe it's opening some new questions as well. Let us know in the chat. Cool. I just quickly want to say to everybody who's new on the stream, would be super cool if you're enjoying this, hit like, also hit subscribe. And for those of you who don't know or somehow arrived through a method other than the meetup, I will remind you that we do have a meetup group. I will share a link for this in the chat in a second. But if you like this kind of content and enjoy these sort of sessions, just jump on the meetup group and you'll get notifications about future events. We do a whole bunch of different stuff. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we were chatting to Melissa Perry about product management and escaping the build trap. And in a couple of weeks' time, we will be chatting to one of my friends and the director of one of the directors of engineering at Spotify, Nivea Henry, talking about leadership and superpowers, which is, of course, an interesting topic. So yeah, I stick it in the chat and you can join us there. Cool. So how about another question? Let's have a look here. So one question that I got the other day that I quite liked, somebody said Flight Devils puts quite a lot of focus on trying to manage dependencies. How do we make the decision about when maybe we should try to remove the dependencies instead? Or how would we balance this kind of thinking? I'm curious what your thoughts and ideas on this topic is.
So, the first thought that always immediately comes in my mind is it's a good start to know your dependencies. Because I think in many organizations we have no clue where the dependencies are and who is depending on whom, and whether it's an external dependency or an internal dependency. So the first thing is model your dependency, get to know how the work is being done in your organization and learn about the dependencies. And then you can make the choice between are there good strategies to remove them, or are there dependencies I have to stick with, or can I systematically rearrange the way of working so that the dependencies, I don't know, go away. But first step is know your dependencies, know what you're doing.
I like this. I often, it's kind of, the question is sort of a little bit of, do we try to get better at solving the problem, or do we just try to get the work flowing, is kind of another variation of this. And for me, it's a case of like, you probably have to do a bit of both. And so the question is, do you do them both at the same time? Probably not. Maybe you do one and then the other. And so if you already know some obvious stuff and you can solve your dependencies by fixing them some other way, cool, do this if this is a cheap and quick way. But otherwise, I like the idea of trying to get things flowing, because in my experience, usually things flowing, things visible, this starts to give us a sense of where the problems actually lie. And then we can start to address them. That's my sort of 2 cents on that.
The other thing is, what does remove dependencies actually mean? So how do you remove dependencies? Of course, whenever I can remove dependencies and I have an obvious way to do it, yeah, sure, I would remove the dependency. But I think most organization thinks like the holy grail is to do yet another reorganization. And we need to tear down the functional silos. So we build cross-functional silos. We need to tear down the product silo. We build product silos. We build market segment silos. So the thing is, in knowledge work, you will always end up in a kind of silo, because you will always have some dependencies. And I would totally echo what Andreas said. So try to see your dependencies, manage your dependencies, and then when you see, okay, now you can really get rid of these dependencies, try to get rid of them by doing maybe a reorganization or something like this. But I mean, Cliff, you used to work for Spotify, the Spotify model, right? That's the holy grail these days of agile, whatever. So we can assume Spotify has no dependencies whatsoever, correct?
Sure. No, not at all. I mean,
dependencies. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is the thing, though, is that, and that's why I usually recommend to people is that, like, if you're sitting in a situation where you have lots of dependencies, the likelihood that you know that you have lots of dependencies, but how do you know which ones are the right ones to solve? I love that framing of, like, make it visible, try to understand it first. The other thing is that I would just echo what you said, Klaus, is about the restructuring, is that for me, I often say that restructuring, similar to building, like in the architectural sense, is about the most expensive way to solve almost any problem that you have. That doesn't mean you should never use it, but you should be very sure that you're using it in the right way. So as an example, a lot of people say, well, our teams are always dependent on each other. We have a separate, development, tester, design, something like this in separate teams. So we should have cross-functional teams. Now, I think the cross-functional teams are generally a good idea, but at some point you start to end up, which was Spotify's challenge, you end up with 15, 20, 30 people on any single squad to be able to do anything. Not every squad needs all of those roles or all of those things. And so these kind of general rules of, like, well, everything should always be cross-functional. I don't know. Like, I mean, maybe it's helping a little bit, but it probably doesn't fix all of your problems. So if you have some visibility or some way to kind of sense if it's helping, this, I think, would be for sure super helpful. Yeah.
And I think, Cliff, we should link the episode with Troy McGinnis into the comments or wherever.
Yeah.
Because we had a whole episode, like a Flight Club episode with Troy McGinnis, where we were talking about dependencies. He is the biggest dependency. I mean, man of dependency, Troy.
There's one more thing I like about visualizing and understanding dependencies and understanding on dependencies. Normally, we know whom we are depending on, but we never think about who is depending on us. And this way of visualizing our work in a flight level 2 system always makes us aware of the fact that there are people depending on us. There are people waiting on us. We are the bottleneck for others. And this gives us the chance to talk to them and to plan with them. And this is a way of managing dependencies as well, making them transparent and understandable.
I had a laugh the other day. Someone was telling me about I don't know if you've seen this. I think it's popular in SAFe, but I've seen it used in other places where you do this kind of string connecting all the dependencies.
Oh, yeah.
They referred to this as building a carpet because it's just much string. There's actually nothing. And I think this is the thing, is that like what we're actually looking for is some way. And I think when we have a visibility of the flow, we start to see not just that there is a dependency, but which one is actually important to solve. And so, I mean, I could say a lot more on this, but I think there's a lot of interesting things in this space.
Yeah. Maybe one more addition, because Christoph Steinlehner just asked, okay, which mapping techniques do you use to visualize dependencies? Advertisement. So Troy McGinnis, we just talked about him before. He developed an app which is called the Blocked app, and the Blocked app is actually a way of how to like visualize somehow your blockers in your organization, and the dependency is actually nothing else than a blocker in the future, so we know it will pop up in the future. So there are some great ways in this app where you can model your dependencies, and where, like what Andreas just said, one thing is to know I'm dependent on this one, but who's dependent on me? That's also something that you can model in this tool. So maybe we also put the link in there, and we hope that we get a lot of love of Troy because we're making this app now.
So I actually want to connect.
It's really cool tool.
Yeah. So I want to connect two questions together actually here. So Christoph's question here: what mapping techniques do you use for visualizing dependencies? And Rita's questions here: any tools for best visualizing flight level systems? And if I can just jump in on a thought on this, is that kind of connecting to the prior point of visualizing the dependencies. I think often what I see people struggling with is like we make a map of all the dependencies for some sets of work or some giant quarter or whatever it is that we're planning to work on. But the reality is that we're always going to need to deal with emergent dependencies. We're going to get a blocker that came up, something that emerged, that kind of thing. And so for me, what's helpful in this setting is that we have something like a flight level system that enables us to be able to see not just where in the flow it is and thus how important it is, but what we're also able to see is actually like the sequence of the importance. So I've talked quite a few times before about this thing of don't let number 3 block number 1. And I think actually for me, this is one of the main ways that I like to try to tackle the dependency issue, is to rather than saying all the dependencies or everything that comes up is somehow important, we actually put focus on one thing and we say this thing is super important. And so all of its dependencies get priority in all the corresponding teams, right? It's a nice idea in sort of idealistic sense, but practically what you start to create is you say, this project, this bet, this one is important, so let's resolve all of the dependencies that we need that are blocking it so that we can keep it flowing. And I think what this enables us to do is rather not worry too much about how do we visualize this massive carpet of what's going on, all the dependencies that we have. We're just saying, this thing is actually important. Please, can everybody solve it right now because it's blocking all future releases, or because it's the number 1 project for the company, or something along those lines. I don't know if we sort of talked a little bit too much maybe about the dependency aspect of it. I want to sort of draw back to Rita's question specifically about what tools and suggestions you have for this. We often get this question coming up. I'm curious what the two of you think about tools for visualization.
Well, from my perspective, the best tool for visualization is a whiteboard. So something haptical, analog, where I can paint on, where I can put sticky notes on, where I can glue things on, where I can write on. And if I'm living in I don't know, in the digital world and or in a remote organization, I always prefer using a digital whiteboard. The reason to do so is when we implement flight levels, we know that we want to develop and evolve our organization. So we want to change it. And if we introduce flight levels and we know that we change our organization, we can be very sure that the flight level systems, especially in the beginning, will change immediately. And no flight level system, constructed with a team survives first contact with reality. So it changes almost immediately. And then you need a very dynamic tool. And for me, the best way to find an initial good visualization of the organization is really using an analog tool or a digital whiteboard. So that's my answer. Basta.
I would add some nuances to this. Like when you're starting out, you most of the time have to change quite a lot of things. So especially when you start, it really makes sense that you take care of, okay, how easy is it to change like the structure of our visualization? How easy is it to, add like, blockers and stuff like this? And as Andreas said, something like a whiteboard is the highest form of flexibility, of course. Miro, mural, concept board, these kind of things, which are virtual whiteboard, is similar. But as you go ahead and you are getting like, you know what you're doing. Like on a Wordle map, we would say you're going to the right side. So everything is more or less being like, okay, we know what we are doing here. It's getting like part of our process and everything. Other tools like, Plan View, Linkit, Campanize, Swift, they add some additional features where it makes sense. But the question, I think, is always like, when do you really want to start with it? When there's a high degree of uncertainty and you have to change a lot, choose a tool where this change is actually really easy to do.
Yeah.
That would be my
suggestion. One other thing that I can add on this is that I think often what I've seen is that when people are starting out, and I tell the story of an insurance company that I worked at a while ago, and they showed me this wall of 400 items that they said were the things that they were doing. The reality was that over time, as we introduced a level 2 system into the organization, the number of things that they were working on went from 400, which was, they were obviously not working on 400 things with 100 people, but it went down to a number of focusing on 15 projects at a time. And the reality is that it's much easier to keep track of 15 things than it is to keep track of 400. And so not only is the hard work of putting something in a tool gets somehow easier once you've introduced some focus, but it does also perhaps question like, well, why do we need a tool if the main reason we were using it was because we were using it because we had a lot of things. And so I think there's a couple of aspects inside there. For me, the important thing is the visualization and the fact that it's easy to change, just to emphasize those points. Klaus, your clicking makes me think that you had a thought or you were going to add something.
Oh, no, sorry, it was just a mosquito.
He was just thinking.
No problem.
Sorry. They are really beasts. They're eating us here. It's really
cool. Florian is asking an interesting question here. He says, if a flight level 3 board is already implemented, should the level 2 boards below be comparable to each other, i.e. constructed the same way? I'm curious what the two of you think about this.
Now I will give you the consultant answer first, and it depends, as always.
Yeah.
And it provides some time for me to think a little more. Should the boards be constructed in the same way? They don't have to be constructed in the same way. Let's turn it that way. So usually you have a question you want to answer. You have a problem you want to solve, and the board you're building, the board you're designing, should reflect and should help you answer the question. Should you help solve your problem? If two teams of, or if two value streams have nearly the same question, these boards can be quite similar, but it's also absolutely okay if the structure of the boards are completely different. The question is always, do they provide the information you need to have to draw the right decisions? And in so far, I would never go for similarity. I would never go for comparability. I would never build a template of a board, copy it, and say to the teams, you can use this one. So the teams have to set up and build their boards on their own, basing on the problems they want to solve. And there might be similar structures, but I would not say this is a rule, and I would never say that they have to look.
But
do not
I kind of like the question, and I would like to add some things what you just said. I totally agree. So it's not about copying the board, because one of the principles is like, don't build something for people, build something with people. And this is just like, I mean, we touched this before. It has to be my board, right? Like the one who is working with it. So that's number one, the rule number one. But what we see quite often is, when you are in an organization, especially in a large organization where thousands of people are working, so you have a lot of flight level 2 systems or flight level 1 systems in such an organization. What we usually do is, we don't, not each and every group of people has to go through the same process and start from like square one. What we usually do is, when we build the system, it's again, like Andreas said before, people build their own system, but we bring ideas into the room. Like, they're usually in large organizations, if there are already flight level 2 systems or so in place, we bring people into the workshop who present what they've already done. So people get some idea. Okay, this is a group, they are working similar to us. So we can like give them some inspiration, and that's something what I really like. So it's not about copying what others are doing, but it's like getting the inspiration. I would never roll out the flight level 2 system to the entire organization and put people in front of the board and like, okay, have fun with it, that's your board, build it on your own. But bring inspiration into the room. That's really cool, and you can really like operationalize this quite heavily. So I once ran a workshop in China where we built more than 20 boards in parallel. So they basically rented a part of a university, and it was a workshop where more than 20 boards were built in parallel. And we exactly identified, okay, this is a group of specialists that are dealing with, I don't know, battery kind of things. The others, they are engine kind of people. So this is somehow similar. So we just brought in some people from this part of the organization. They showed what they have done. We have this conversation. They can ask questions and everything. But still, the board was built by the people. I hope this somehow makes sense. But that's really it's a very good practice, actually.
This is pretty much my interpretation or my explanation of what a flight level guide does. So we prevent people from reinventing the wheel over and over again. So we have concepts and ideas, but they have to assemble it by themselves in order to answer their questions. Yeah.
And the cool thing is, if you already have some experience in the company, use examples from this company. If you are, I don't know, at the automotive manufacturer, and there are already automotive boards here, use them and don't come with an insurance company system. So they can see what others are doing, but never fall in the trap that they should copy it. They should just see it as a source of inspiration. And I think that's really good practice.
Very cool. So I want to actually jump back to a question that was asked a little bit earlier in the chat. So we were talking about a couple of things about managing dependencies versus kind of removing them. And someone with a wonderful rock star name of Stone Ank is suggesting that we're probably referring to the reverse or inverse Conway maneuver as described in team topologies as a way of minimizing dependencies through intelligent team design on large projects or portfolios. So for those of you who don't know what this is basically what you say is that instead of trying to imagine your systems architecture, as in your organizational structure, your technological architecture, what you do is you instead design an organizational structure that will produce that architecture, if that makes sense, right? So the idea here is, and I think this is actually kind of part of what Flight Levels is specifically trying to address, right? If you see this inside an organization, when your banking app and your home loans app don't talk to each other in the real world, it's probably because the human beings inside the organization are not talking to each other. And so what we're trying to do is say, well, in order to deliver the value to the customer, we need to get the right parts of the organization talking to each other at the right time. And so exactly as what you say here, this concept of the reverse, or I think it's sometimes also called an inverse Conway maneuver. The idea is exactly to try to address this. And I think a large part of what we do with Flight Levels is exactly that, designing infrastructural systems or ways to kind of coordinate the work and have a discussion so that folks can actually build systems that make sense. I'm curious if either of the two of you have any additional thoughts on this, but I just thought it was an interesting comment and wanted to bring it up. Anything that either of the two of you would like to add?
That's too clever for me to to add something.
Nope.
Yeah,
But I think I think it's just spot on. I mean, just like what you said, Cliff. So yeah, I mean, we probably call it agile interaction. So make sure that the right people are talking about the right stuff at the right time and so on. Yeah, but that's exactly the thing. Yeah. Nothing to
I think it's. I can recommend looking both into Conway's law and into Teams topologies. Both the book Teams topologies and Mel Conway are doing some very interesting work. Actually, I was at Map Camp actually yesterday, and Melvin Conway was talking about a couple of things that were super interesting. He's moved on a little bit from technical infrastructure into some social systems and so on. But yeah, really interesting.
Cool. I like the thought of. It's not only the work which is flowing through the system; it's always the information which is flowing through the system, and you have to design the information flow just like you design the workflow. And this is what we do in agile interactions. So I like that thought very much.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Cool. And I see Barbara was also excited about MapCamp. I think I actually saw your name in some of the chat sessions. Cool. Indeed, yes. So I want to change the tone a little bit and ask a question that I heard before, which was someone saying, well, we're just starting out with flight levels. What are some of the common mistakes or errors or something that you see people making? They said the short sentence was so that we can avoid making those same mistakes ourselves, which I think it's a very smart line of questioning to ask people who've had some experience. I think, what did you screw up in the past, or what have you seen people screw up in the past, so that we can learn from that. So I'm curious, perhaps to both of you, what would you think of in this sense?
So my very first question, or my initial question whenever I'm asked to help an organization implement something, flight levels or whatever, the first question is always, what is your problem? What do you want to solve? And it's interesting how less often people who want to implement some kind of transformation or change into their organization can answer to this question, or have reflected on that question. I mean, in many cases, you get an answer like, we want to get faster, or the worst answer to the question would be because the other company is doing it as well. So they all become agile. So we need to become agile because this is how to work today. We want to be on the new work train, whatever you want to call that. And this is the worst mistake for me. You need to know what problem you want to solve. Only then you can figure out which screws you can, turn in order to change your organization. And then you can figure out what kind of framework or methodology might help you solving the problem. And maybe it's flight levels then. So this is the way I would like to go towards this kind of question. And this is, for me, the worst mistake. Then the rest of mistakes follow.
Yeah, I would say that's a great one. I've seen that far too often. Klaus, were you going to add something?
Add you something, Cliff. You have great experience in this, I think. Not that I mean in great experience in screwing up things.
That wasn't how I interpreted it, but now I'm wondering.
If you want to know about mistakes, ask Cliff.
Yeah. I think one of the most common mistakes that I see people making, and I made a joke about farts and agility earlier, but I think this thing of not actually involving people in the process. I've worked so many times with a senior leadership team, whether it's introducing flight levels or anything else, where you've spent 6-9 months discussing a change or figuring out something in the background. And basically the conversation is like, I now show up to tell the company about it. And it's me talking to you for 30 minutes and then saying, right now, everybody go and do things this new way. And people have had really no time to be involved. So this is the first time they've heard it. They maybe don't even understand what's going on, let alone whether or not they agree or disagree with it, or what the implications of it could or couldn't be. So I think really making sure that you take people on the journey with you as you figure out things. And basically, as you arrive at, as Andreas said, at the problem you want to solve, it should probably make sense that it's not only you that sees it. And I think this is especially dangerous or common to occur in a senior leadership position. People sort of rely on their sort of positional or authority rather than actually involving people in the conversation. To tell you a counterexample quickly of how I've seen it done effectively, something like a restructure or introduction of the flight level 2 system. Maybe there's some conversation with a few of the leads and some people who kind of have some sort of broader insight into how the organization works. And then go and talk to a few people and say, hey, I wanted to give you a quick heads up. What do you think about this idea? What do you think about this proposal? Something along those lines. Shop it around a few times, get some input, update your plan a bit based on that input. And then once you're ready to have a sort of a broader announcement, maybe something in a public setting where you say, okay, we're suggesting this idea, but we'd like to give you, I don't know, some days or maybe even a week or so to weigh in, depending on the size of the change, that kind of a thing. But really sit down with people and have a time to talk further. Don't just kind of broadcast once and done. So involve people in it. An easy way to think of this is that if you're not going to adapt based on any input, then you're just communicating and telling people what to do. But if you communicate a little bit earlier in that process, then people actually do have the opportunity that it could be included in the plan. So don't communicate too early, but don't go too late either. Would kind of be my thought on this. Yeah, I think just to put a point on it, I think very often the kinds of things that you see people messing up with flight levels are the same things that I see people messing up with change in general. They bite off more than they can chew, they don't involve people in it, and they have no idea what their goal is before they start. And this is really, just tackle those three and you'll already be further than 90, probably 98% of folks out there. Yeah. Cool. So we're coming a little bit towards the end of the session for today. So I want to take a moment before we go to the last, probably 2 questions that we can answer. Just remind everybody, if you enjoyed the session, super cool way to give us feedback, hit the like button. And the other one is to hit subscribe. I remind also for those of you who are watching the video later on, YouTube tells me that something like 75% of you are not subscribed to the channel, and that makes me sad. So I try some reverse psychology. Hit like, hit subscribe, and you will hear about our future events and activities, and that would be super cool. So let's see. I had 2 more questions that I'd like to do as kind of like a sort of, I guess, a winding down sort of a question. The first one would be if you were to offer one suggestion of a book or something that really kind of changed how you think about these things, what book, or it could be something smaller than a book, a blog post, a video, something like this, but what would you recommend that people have a look into if they're interested in exploring these topics further? Maybe Klaus, you can go first.
I mean, a book about flight levels, you mean? I mean, I only know one. So this would be Rethinking Agile. But
you mean this one?
Yeah, I mean this.
Oh, my camera's backwards, but yeah, that one.
But I think yes, it tells a little bit about flight levels, of course, and why it would make sense. But I would actually recommend another book which I just reread. So I read it a couple of, I don't know, years, I think, already ago. And Cliff, you know it because I'm always talking about it, but I reread it now. And this is Building a Story Brand, which is like how you tell a story. And I think having a convincing story is really important when it comes to change. And I think this is just always like a good reminder of how to build a compelling story. And the funny thing is, I read Building a Story Brand after I wrote Rethinking Agile. And when I read through Rethinking Agile, I didn't do everything, but there's quite a lot of things that I somehow followed in Rethinking Agile, which you can also read like from a theoretical basis in Building a Story Brand.
It's a really interesting book,
it's totally
actually,
a different genre, but it's totally important, I think, when it comes to change or something like this.
I think that's a great point, because what happens often is that we read books. I mean, the book is kind of framed, and you would probably find it in the marketing or business marketing kind of section of a library or bookstore or something. But so often, I think exactly what you said, that thing of like promoting stuff and like kind of how you communicate something is really important. And for me, one of the key things that really stuck out in there is that I think very often as change agents, we try to be the hero of somebody else's story. And in reality, people don't want to give up being the hero of their own story. So make them the hero of their own story. And I think this is really quite a powerful aspect. It's partly why we talk so much about this involving people in the change. But anyway, let me not talk too much about your book, Klaus. I'm curious. Mr. Andreas, you probably have a thought or a suggestion.
Yeah, I have suggested for 2 books. So the books, it's actually 2 books I'm reading right now. The one book is called They Called It Work, which is very interesting because it reflects on what we call work. It reflects on how we understand work and how we understand the way we try to provide work. Normally, what we do is we provide time, and we get paid for providing time. And it's a manifest, for thinking about we should provide value, and this is what we should get paid for. So we shouldn't care about the number of hours spent as long as the value created is what is required from our society, from ourselves, or from the organization we're working for. It's a very interesting book. It's not so fluently to read. It's not the best book to sit by the pool, but I don't know. I don't read for fun. That brings me to the second book I would like to recommend. This is the book I wrote by myself. It's called Steampunk Economy, Steam Engine to the Moon. I read it because I have some sessions where people ask me to read from my book. This is about the reasons why and how far economy and society is changing, and delivers good reasons for us to implement flight levels and flight level thinking in order to solve the problems which are described and explained in this book. Yeah.
Cliff, we can't hear you.
I am muted. Sorry about that. Seems that I failed at this.
This was just a feature test.
Yeah, feature test. Turns out it works. My ability to remember, however, I do this in Zoom calls all the time. I love that both of you can recommend your own books and another book. I, however, was joking earlier and saying that I don't have a book that I wrote, so I recommend what's written on this Post-it note. I'm joking. I will write a book at some point one day, and we will see. My book recommendation, however, I would pick actually Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'll link it in the chat in a second. And for me, there were several takeaways from this book, but the one I would emphasize here is they talk about this concept of using friction, so designing your environment to create certain behaviors. So simple example, if you watch too much TV, take the batteries out when you stop watching, put them in a box, lock it in a thing, put it in the cupboard. Now it's quite a lot of friction to watch TV next time. You can use the inverse of this. For example, say you want to read a book or you want to read more often. When you get up in the morning, put the book on your pillow. When you come to go to bed at night, the book is there. Very low friction to just read a few pages, something like this, yeah? And I adapt this quite often in an organizational context. I think it's quite powerful. If you make the good things easy and you make the hard things kind of very difficult to do naturally, you see a lot of positive and interesting things happen. The rest of the book is, of course, interesting, and so I'll link it in the chat. Cool. So we started about 1 minute late. So I want to go 1 minute over. And what I'm going to do is ask each of you to give your one tip for people starting out with flight levels. What is one thing that you now know that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
One tip.
Just one.
Be brave enough to face your challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Nice
I have
and
a more
philosophical.
I have a more profound one. Attend the flight levels introduction course.
Yeah.
And yours, Cliff?
I would remind people to take others on the journey with them. It's such a huge and powerful part of my own personal learning experience. Some of you will find it easy. I'm constantly amazed. My wife is very good at this. She very naturally kind of works with other people and kind of remembers to take other people on the journey. I tend to get lost and kind of just charge off in my own direction, and then wonder why no one else is following me, kind of thing. And so, yeah. If you're similar to me, remember to take others with you on the journey, have some empathy, connect with them more often, that kind of a thing. Or alternatively, get a wife or partner who does that, and you will learn a lot from them. It's most fantastic. Cool. So, I want to thank everybody for joining us on the live stream tonight. It's been cool to have this kind of very interactive questions with you. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to Andreas for making himself available and for bringing such interesting answers to all the questions. And lastly, just to say thank you to Klaus. You are supposed to be on holiday, and I guess right after this you return to being on holiday. So thank you for making some time available, getting out of the pool on time and putting your carver outside of the screenshot so that you could be with us for the last hour or so.
Empty.
Cool. So, it's empty. Then we should definitely end now and you can continue. Awesome. It's been lovely to hang out with all of you this evening. Hope you have a good time, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks. Have a good time. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Goodbye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, Cliff. Cheers.
Bye.